serial unaliver who murdered 4 women between the years of 1970 and 1975. He mutilated their bodies and hid them in his apartment.
The case of Fritz Honka remains one of the most unsettling in post-war German criminal history, not because of the number of his victims, but because of the eerie combination of opportunity, isolation, and ordinary appearances that allowed his crimes to persist undetected for years. By the time authorities discovered his activities in 1975, Honka had already ended the lives of at least 4 women and concealed their remains in his apartment, a space neighbors had long considered suspicious, yet had largely ignored. The outcome, a conviction for 1 murder and 3 counts of manslaughter, coupled with a sentence of 15 years in a psychiatric institution, left a lingering discomfort. A man capable of multiple killings, living among his community, punished relatively lightly by law, and eventually released back into society. The disturbing reality lies not only in his acts but in the social and systemic oversights that allowed them. Honka's life before the murders was unremarkable in the eyes of many. Fritz Paul Honka was born in 1935 in Leipzig. He experienced the disruption and hardships of post-war Germany. He later moved to Hamburg, settling in the St. Pauli district, an area known for nightlife, bars, and the red light scene. This environment would provide both the backdrop and the means for his crimes. St. Pauli was densely populated, transient, and vibrant, conditions that allowed an observant and calculating individual to exploit the vulnerabilities of others without immediate detection. The pattern of Honka's crimes began in the early 1970s. He targeted women who were socially marginalized, many struggling with alcohol dependence, some involved in sex work, and most living precariously on the edges of urban life. These women were frequent patrons of local bars and pubs, which served as the initial points of contact. One pub in particular, known as Zum Goldenen Handschuh, would become infamous as the place where Honka met most of his victims. There, amidst the noisy, dimly lit interiors, he would identify those he deemed most vulnerable. The selection of victims was deliberate, based on their isolation and lack of social support, which reduced the likelihood of inquiries or immediate concern if they disappeared. Once a potential victim was chosen, Honka would invite them to his apartment. Fritz Honka's hands were ordinary at first glance, neither large nor unusually strong, but their history would mark them with infamy. In photographs from his arrest, they appeared pale, worn, and slightly misshapen from years of labor and heavy drinking. Yet it was these hands that became instruments of both interaction and violence, bridging the gap between mundane routine and the extraordinary crimes he would commit. In the bars of St. Pauli, they extended in casual gestures, offering a drink, lighting a cigarette, brushing a stray lock of hair from a patron's face. They conveyed familiarity and an illusion of safety, masking the potential for harm that would follow when he brought women back to his apartment. His own residence, modest and unassuming, became the scene where life was extinguished and bodies concealed. Within these walls, he carried out the acts that would later define him in the annals of German criminal history. While the methods of killing involved violence, the most chilling aspect was his methodical approach to concealment. Rather than disposing of the bodies, Honka dismembered some of the remains and stored them in his apartment and attic. Neighbors reported a persistent, unpleasant odor but largely dismissed it, reflecting both the social detachment of the surrounding community and a failure of systems to intervene. The timeline of events leading to discovery is almost accidental. For years, Honka's crimes remained hidden in plain sight. It was a fire in July 1975 that inadvertently brought attention to the apartment. When firefighters responded to the blaze, They encountered human remains in the attic, a discovery that immediately prompted police investigation. The findings shocked authorities, but in retrospect, revealed a pattern of negligence and underestimation by neighbors and local authorities alike. Honka himself was arrested shortly afterward when he returned home. Initial interrogation brought inconsistent confessions, at times indicating remorse, at others recanting memory entirely. Notably, he made references to figures such as Jack the Ripper, suggesting a complex psychological profile and a troubling perception of his actions. Meanwhile, Honka's trial in 1976 reflected both his personal circumstances and the limitations of the legal system at the time. The court ultimately convicted him of 1 murder and 3 counts of manslaughter, attributing part of the verdict to his alcoholism and other psychological factors. His sentence, 15 years in a psychiatric institution, was significantly lighter than life imprisonment, raising questions about how society assesses culpability when addiction, mental health, and social neglect intersect with criminal acts. The public response was muted in part by the victims' marginalization. The women were largely forgotten by wider society, amplifying the sense of injustice in the legal outcome. After serving his sentence, Honka was released in 1993, spending his remaining years under an assumed identity in a nursing home until his death in 1998. The long-term consequences of his crimes extend beyond the immediate loss of life. They highlight systemic vulnerabilities, a social environment that isolates vulnerable individuals, neighbors' reluctance or inability to act on warning signs, and legal frameworks that struggle to balance mental health with accountability. In many ways, the enduring legacy of the Honka case is a cautionary tale about observation, intervention, and societal responsibility. What makes Honka's crimes particularly compelling to investigators and historians is the interplay between ordinary appearances and extraordinary acts. Honka was not a figure of overt menace in public spaces. He did not draw attention through visible aggression or eccentricity. Yet within the confines of his apartment, he carried out actions that challenged conventional understandings of criminal behavior. This contrast underscores a fundamental principle in investigative work. The most dangerous individuals are not always those who are loudest or most visibly threatening, but those who exploit patterns of neglect, isolation, and human trust.
It's brown as cinnamon. It looks so gross and disfigured, and I could not stop looking at it the entire time.
The environment of Hamburg's St. Pauli district also played a role. The area's transient population, nighttime economy, and social stratification created a setting where disappearances could go unnoticed and complaints could be overlooked. Honka's ability to operate undetected for several years was as much a product of social circumstance as personal pathology. Moreover, the lack of coordinated response mechanisms at the time, whether from local authorities, social services, or community oversight, allowed the cycle to continue until accidental discovery forced intervention. Honka's psychological profile, pieced together from trial records and interviews, reflects an individual grappling with severe alcohol dependence, social isolation, and potentially untreated mental health issues. His actions were deliberate and opportunistic, yet they were also entwined with impulses and frustrations that appear in the records as contradictory. Moments of remorse, statements of detachment, and bizarre references to external influences. This combination of calculated behavior and psychological complexity illustrates the challenges in both predicting and understanding criminal conduct, particularly when victims are socially marginalized. Despite the passage of decades, the Honka case continues to attract attention because it raises questions that remain unresolved. How many crimes go unnoticed because society overlooks vulnerable populations? How does the criminal justice system weigh personal pathology against accountability? And perhaps most unsettlingly, how ordinary spaces, apartment buildings, neighborhood pubs, local streets, can conceal extraordinary violence without detection. These questions are amplified by the cultural depictions of the case, particularly the novel and film Der Goldene Handschuh, which dramatize events without straying into sensationalism, offering insight into environment, behavior, and consequence rather than shock value. Ultimately, the story of Fritz Honka is a study in contrasts, invisibility and notoriety, ordinariness and horror, neglect and accountability. It is a reminder that crimes are rarely committed in isolation. They unfold in complex social contexts where indifference, oversight, and systemic gaps intersect with individual pathology. The enduring impact of Honka's actions is not measured solely in the lives lost, but in the lessons left for communities, investigators, and legal systems about vigilance, empathy, and the responsibilities owed to the most vulnerable members of society. The discovery of Honka's apartment, the trial, and the aftermath form a continuum that continues to provoke reflection. Each step, from casual acquaintance in a bar to deadly encounter, from concealment to accidental exposure, underscores the human and institutional factors that allowed the crimes to persist. While his name may evoke fascination or horror in popular culture, the reality of Fritz Honka's life and actions remains grounded in social, psychological, and procedural truths. It is these truths that make the case both disturbing and instructive, ensuring it remains a point of reference for criminologists, sociologists, and historians alike.